CHÉOS exists to improve health outcomes for B.C., Canada, and the world. Learn more at chaos.ubc.ca.
Good morning. Welcome to our first round and work in progress of the fall session, of the fall school session. I want to begin by acknowledging that I am based in the traditional unceded ancestral lands of the Squamish, the Musqueam, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations. I think most of you are, and I'd like to acknowledge the land that we are on. And if some of you are from other parts of the province, from other lands, I would like to also acknowledge those. It gives me great pleasure today to introduce Dr. Linda Lee, who's professor and Harold Robinson Arthritis Society Chair at the Department of Physical Therapy at the University of British Columbia. She's a senior scientist at the Arthritis Research Canada and a CHÉOS scientist. She holds a Canada Research Chair in Patient-Oriented Knowledge Translation. Dr. Lee's research centers on improving the care for people with arthritis and supporting patient self-care. Her work focuses on the integration of online, mobile, and wearable tools in healthcare. It is really great to see Linda presenting here today. And just by way of some background, I first met Linda in 2006 when Linda connected with me as she moved to UBC, and she went to the Faculty of Medicine mentoring website, and they list people that you can work as mentors, and she asked me to be involved in her mentor. I was really honored, and I still do to this day. And I think she mentors me more than I mentor her nowadays. And then by coincidence, you know, I was also a scientist at the Arthritis Research Center, and in her past, her PhD supervisor is somebody I'd worked with, and then she went to Ottawa and worked with a group that I was associated with. So a lot of different things brought us together in Vancouver. It's been a great association, and she is like at the forefront of patient-oriented research. And then her talk today is titled Patient-Oriented Research and Knowledge Translation in Arthritis Rehabilitation. And while she's focusing on arthritis rehabilitation in this talk, she's sought by a lot of people all over UBC and across the country, because as you know, knowledge translation is something we need to do in every area, not just arthritis. So thank you, Linda, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Aslan. There is no greater joy than being introduced by one's mentor. So I am very grateful to have been introduced by you, and thank you for all those years of mentoring. You know how much I'm grateful for for your help over the years. So thank you. So let me share my slides, and I want to welcome everyone to this talk as well. So hopefully you see my audience view. If someone can give me a thumbs up, that would be great. Thank you, Sean. So like Aslam, I am also speaking to you from the, Vancouver, which is the traditional unceded territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish Nation, which is where my team has the privilege to do our work. And we're very, very grateful for that. So first off, patient-oriented research, we sort of use the definition of the B.Sc support unit. So I just want to put it out there so you kind of have an idea where I orientate my, to orient my work. So our work is really guided by the principle that we're doing research that is in partnership with patient partners. It answers research questions that matters to patients, and it aims to improve healthcare. I particularly want to thank some of the patient partners that I see in the audience for this talk. So thank you for spending your time with us. But what I also want to acknowledge is where I come from in my patient-oriented research. Some of you may know that in the late 90s, early 2000, there are several fields that are really strong in patient engagement. They call it different names at that time, but HIV/AIDS research, cancer research, mental health, as well as arthritis, where it has a lot of strength and a lot of work that's being done to involve patients and the public as a part of shaping research for the field. So I was fortunate enough to be one of the few trainee cohorts that was funded and mentored by some amazing patient partners and researchers in arthritis and learn how to work with patient partners. So I do want to acknowledge that, where I learned my skills and my approach of research in working with patients and being very fortunate to be in this field. So what I would like to do for this morning is to focus on the concept of implementation and to share some of our implementation research on promoting physical activity in people with arthritis. I also want to talk about the important roles of patients in some of our implementation research. And I'll end by reflect a little bit on my experience working with patient partners. Before I go on any further, I do want to acknowledge the tremendous expertise in knowledge translation and implementation science within CHÉOS. I know I'm amongst some really brilliant practitioners and scientists in the audience. Dr. Amy Salmon, Dr. Sarah Monroe, Dr. Lillian Hung. I mean, I watch your work and really admire that. And of course, Alison Holmes and Aggie Black, you are just amazing and phenomenal leaders in knowledge translation. So I do want to acknowledge that. Now, why do we care about knowledge translation? Really, billions of dollars has been invested globally in health research, but the knowledge generated is unlikely to translate into health benefit if it's not being used. So many of us heard the number that was published way back in 2000, that it took about 17 years to turn about 14% of originally published research to benefit patient care. Sadly, fast forward to 2016, we're still not that much better. There was a report published pre-COVID, obviously, by the US National Institutes of Health that estimated that it still took about 14 years and $2 billion to move a new drug or a new medical device from conception to market. That included about 6.5 years of lab research, 6 years of clinical trials, and if the result was good, it still take about 1.5 years for FDA approval. Now, of course, with the pandemic, with vaccine development and deployment, the timeline has shortened by a lot. So hopefully we can learn from, if there's anything we can learn from this experience in how to move knowledge and research faster into benefiting patient health and population health. But, we are still have lots of room for improvement. So that gets to the point why we actually need knowledge translation. Now, I promise I'm not going to belabor the definition of CIHR's definition on knowledge translation. But for really 2 decades, research funders have been playing a critical role in shaping how evidence could and should be mobilized. Now, in CIHR's definition of knowledge translation, it emphasized that this is a dynamic and iterative process that includes ethically sound application of knowledge to improve health and strengthen healthcare system. Now, the concept of ethically sound application of knowledge is important, especially when research is used in patient care, as we all know. Now, the focus here, of course, is not about the traditional concept of ethics, which is about right versus wrong. Instead, it focused on using principles of ethics when applying the knowledge. So patient-oriented knowledge translation, it really focuses on bioethics, which is about applying a principled approach that encourages researchers and health professionals to work within a framework of universal values, like respect for the person, concern for their welfare, and justice. So applying these principles, it would make sense that high quality, evidence-based guidelines are a good source of knowledge to apply in an equitable manner. But we also can find a lot of examples where practice guidelines are not being applied to the fullest extent in practice. So let's use osteoarthritis as an example. So here is a list of guidelines that were published in the last 2 decades. The recommendations in these guidelines, including exercise and physical activity as the first-line treatment, has been remarkably consistent across these guidelines. Now, we know that moving more, sitting less is a good thing for our joints, our heart, and our mind. But many people with arthritis are not active enough to reach health benefits. So now we actually, recognize that just by simply telling people to exercise or just tell people to focus, getting 150 minutes of activities every week is not going to work in most people who are not already active. So it seems that the problem here is not about knowing what to do to manage arthritis, but how to support people to start and stay physically active. Now, prescribing exercise and promoting physical activity is a classic example of a complex intervention. So essentially, the treatment seems simple. Someone with knee osteoarthritis, you have a physiotherapist to assess them, you prescribe treatment, making sure that it's the right type, the right dose, the right frequency. But we also know that the success for this treatment also depends on how it's being delivered. So does the physiotherapist have enough time to teach the person how to do the exercise correctly? Is there enough time to guide the person to develop a plan that is realistic to stay physically active? Does the physiotherapist have the knowledge to tailor the intervention? So as you can imagine, working with someone who's 50-year-old, osteoarthritis in the knee, trying to prescribe some exercise to strengthen the muscle and keep them in an active lifestyle is quite different from working with a 70-year-old with knee osteoarthritis plus 2 other chronic conditions and at the early stage of frailty. Very, very different. So do they know how to tailor the intervention? And of course, when we deliver an intervention, what we say makes a difference. How we say it makes a difference. The tone, the choice of words, are you building a rapport with the patient? All of those counts into how the intervention, the exercise is actually being done or not after it's being prescribed. So when we apply an implementation science lens, we focus on the person who delivered the treatment and how to support them to do the job. But of course, there are lots of terms. I know what you're thinking. I'm thinking the same thing. It can be very confusing. Knowledge translation, knowledge dissemination, implementation, and now CIHR use the term knowledge mobilization. So let me just stand a moment, take a moment to for all of us to perhaps get on the same page if it's helpful. So Dr. Jeffrey Curran recently published a paper, a debate paper in implementation science communications, explaining the concepts of implementation, which I personally find really helpful because he used like really simple terms like the thing and do the thing. Okay, so the thing really refers to interventions or practice that is in need of a support. So, for example, counseling patients to be physically active, complex, so getting some support for health professionals sometimes may be helpful for them to be able to deliver the counseling in a helpful manner. Now, to help clinicians to do the thing, some stuff may need to be done to support them to overcome barriers. And this stuff, when we call, is what we call an implementation strategy. So using the example of physical activity counseling, strategies like providing clinicians with interactive training in behavior change techniques, having access to tools to plan and support the counseling practice, and to provide opportunities to see patients' physical activity data, such as what is being recorded on their Fitbit, for example. All of those things could potentially help clinicians to do the thing. So now, when researchers like myself and many of my colleagues study how we do the thing, we're doing implementation research. Okay, so that is sort of a way to think about the whole field of implementation science. So now in the last 10 years, we have seen an increased amount of research that's being done on the thing to promote physical activity. In particular, there's been an increase in research using wearable accelerometers. Now, earlier studies that went back to 2009, when fitness bands and pedometers became popular, these interventions seems to be promising, but the effect size tend to be quite small. So one of the limitations of these studies was that when the intervention was delivered, it was basically, most of the studies simply just give people the device, but give very little guidance on how to be active. So it's not surprising that it worked, but only works a little bit. Consumer grade wearables are good for motivating people to be active because they use a number of behavior change techniques like self-monitoring, setting goals, giving feedback, rewards for people. But some of the really powerful behavior change techniques are absent from these devices if they're used on their own. So for example, using a Fitbit is not going to help people to set a realistic plan to be physically active. It also wouldn't help people to find solutions when they encounter barriers to be active. Or your fitness band is not going to help you to practice the behavior itself. And these behavior change techniques are actually really important. Now, a few years ago, Dr. Jasmine Ma, who just finished a postdoctoral fellowship with us, published a systematic review looking at 24 studies on the influence of behavior change techniques on the effect of physical activity interventions. And what she found was that strategies that included self-monitoring with feedback on performance had the largest effect on physical activity behavior compared to strategies using other techniques. She also found that there's a moderate effect when interventions or when strategies using problem solving and action planning compared to interventions or strategies that using other behavior change techniques. These findings really suggest that we need a multifaceted approach that perhaps integrates technology in the patient health professional interaction in order to support people to be more physically active. Now, there are a number of behavior change models that are useful for clinicians to develop strategies to increase physical activity. And some of you may be familiar with the COM-B model. I put it up there because it resonated with me, and many of our interventions are actually developed based on this model. So this model is really helping, can help clinicians to sort out what are the particular elements that need to be included in an intervention to support healthy behavior. So suppose we are developing a home exercise program for people with knee osteoarthritis to prevent falls. We would consider, well, did the patient have the capability to do that? Do they know what to do, what exercise to do? Can they do it independently? And do they have the opportunity to exercise? So do they have the right equipment? Do they have the right space to do that? And of course, what about their motivation? Do they believe that exercise can help them to prevent falls, or do they already have a habit to exercise. And all of those information are helpful to identify barriers and tailor interventions for people to take control over their activity routine. So since 2015, we have worked with a group of patient partners and clinicians on a program to improve physical activity. This program includes the group education sessions. They are given the Fitbit and they have a physiotherapist to do counseling by phone based on the brief action planning approach. We have also developed an app called Fitbit. It's not here on the diagram right now, but it's in the published paper. What it does is that it allows therapists to set activity parameters remotely for patients to based on their symptoms, and also for patients to get feedback when they are being active, within the day. We have demonstrated in a series of studies that the intervention itself was feasible to implement in the community, and that is also effective in increasing physical activity in people with arthritis after 8 to 12 weeks of the intervention. The work we have done has contributed to a body of knowledge of evidence that an individualized, tailored approach is the best when supporting people with chronic disease to be active, including osteoarthritis and inflammatory arthritis as well. This is a more recent systematic review that was published by an Australian group, including 26 studies. One of those was actually one of our earlier studies in osteoarthritis. And what they found was that while wearable-only intervention shows a trend in improving time spent in physical activity, a multifaceted intervention produced a stronger result. So over the years, we are learning more about how health professionals, physiotherapists can use wearable devices to support people to be more active. But of course, there's still a lot more we need to learn or to understand about tailoring interventions. Now, one of the challenges for health professionals to tailor their physical activity recommendations is the fact that people spend their day in different ways. Now, here is an example that Dr. Lynn Feehan, who is a great collaborator with us, analyzed the 24-hour profile of people with arthritis who were eligible for our physical activity counseling studies. So now our eligibility criteria were quite comprehensive. So we expected a homogeneous group that was probably, quite sedentary. But what was interesting was that in this, we did a latent cost analysis. And what we found was that there were actually 4 distinct profiles of people. It ranges from people who live a pretty balanced lifestyle. They still sit too much. If I can see it on the screen, about not a bit more than 9 hours a day. So there's more work that can be done to improve their physical activity participation. But we also found that there are people who are really sedentary, but also not sleeping, either not sleeping too well, so people not getting enough sleep, or they sleep too much in a day. Now, so what it means is that it makes sense sometimes when health professionals counsel their patients by just focusing primarily in making plans to be more active without looking at what other things are happening in the person's life, how much time that they spend in resting, how's their sleep quality was like, the day before. If we don't take, some of these contextual information into account, it's not surprising that we may not get the expected result from everyone when we're using a counseling approach, even it's really well developed and based on theories. So currently, we are running a 6-month randomized control trial with a 6-month follow-up on a new tool that we've developed to support physiotherapists to do counseling for patients with arthritis. And this particular study you see in here is for people with rheumatoid arthritis, actually. It's a collaboration with Dr. Deanne Lakai, who's the scientific director at Arthritis Research Canada. So in this study, we want to see whether the use of this tool called Arthritis can help to improve self-management capacity and physical activity in people with rheumatoid arthritis. In the app, people not only can track their physical activity with the Fitbit and have it revisualized in a way that makes sense for someone with arthritis, but it also allows people to track their symptoms, their medication, or any important event that related to their health. And the information is overlaid side by side with the physical activity information so they can see it over time. So an important feature also with this app is that it has a health professional portal, which allows the user to give permission to the health professional, the physiotherapist, to see the tracked profile. And another thing is that it has an interface to streamline how the physiotherapist can deliver their counseling. So we're trying to see whether, you know, a better supported approach with the with this website, and we also have a mobile app for people to enter information as well, can help facilitate the counseling even better than what we've seen before. At the beginning of the pandemic, we adapted all of our in-person interaction of the physical activity counseling to online delivery. So we were, it was actually a lot of work to do that, but we were fortunate enough that we were able to get ethics approval and participant consent to actually record these counseling sessions. So here is a practice session with one of our research staff, Kieran, on the left, demonstrating how to set up Fitbit. And on the right, you can see some of the practice participants were looking at the Arthritis, the Fitbit profile, and learn how to use the functionality on the functions on the Arthritis website. So moving forward, we are hoping to be able to conduct further analysis with these Zoom recording to explore the association between how therapists deliver the action planning component of their counseling, which is a key component of the counseling intervention, and how it relates to participants' behavioral and health outcomes. So more to come. Now, during the pandemic, we have also seen an unprecedented use of virtual care, especially in rheumatology. So here is just, you know, a bit of my own reflection here. So I think with more access to wearable devices in the public, more knowledge, more personal data in the hands of patients, arthritis care, it's exciting to see that arthritis care is really starting to change to a model where health professionals decide when you're going to see a patient, to a model in which patients can control when they need to see a health professional because they have all the information in their hands. So I think the question we need to ask ourselves from an implementation science lens is that what kind of stuff is needed to support health professionals to do the thing that help people to exercise and stay active. A few thoughts about rehabilitation. Rehabilitation usually offers episodic, time-limiting interventions. And I think we need to start asking ourselves if we are ready to perhaps reshape the concept of rehabilitation to provide a more continuous patient-centered support for patients to stay active, monitor their health, seek care when it's needed so that they can play an even bigger role in managing their own health. I would be interested in hearing, particularly from my rehabilitation colleagues and people living with arthritis, what you think of these current trend in rehabilitation. I'm going to finish off with a few thoughts about partnering with patients, a few reflections. I think working with patients, one of the great benefit for us was that it brought clarity to our work, and it generate new research ideas. And I'll share 3 examples. So in our research in physical activity counseling, we often hear that patients are frustrated by their Fitbit because it's not recording their steps, sometimes it's accurate, sometimes it's not. So with that conversation, eventually what happened was that, again, with collaborating with Dr. Lynn Feehan, so she is really an expert in objective physical activity measure. So we did a systematic review of 67 validation studies on Fitbit. What makes this review unique was that we were not just looking at the usual accuracy, validity, reliability data, but we specifically look at what people were using it for, and we grouped the studies to look at the accuracy. And here is one of the results that people find quite useful. So when you use a Fitbit and you are moving in a steady pace, you're jogging, walking normally, even walking, relatively slowly, Fitbit is pretty good in capturing your steps. But if you're walking very, very slow, or if you're doing self-paced activities like doing things in the community, walking your dog. So, sometimes you walk fast, sometimes you walk really slow, sometimes you stop. Those type of activities, your Fitbit actually may not capture your steps, especially when you're walking really, really slow. So think about some of our patients with advanced stage osteoarthritis in the knees, and they cannot walk fast. You can be wearing a Fitbit, and your Fitbit will tell you that you're not walking. It's as indicated by some of the studies that in frail older adults, when you use a Fitbit and you wear it around your wrist, most of the steps were not even captured. So that study, the systematic review, which was inspired by working with patients and listening to what people were telling us about their frustration with the device, really helped us to push us further to look at some of the questions about accuracy about the device. And right now what we are doing is a series of validation or a series of studies that are using research-based accelerometers to help to calibrate the Fitbit device, so that we're not trying to use the Fitbit as an outcome measure, because there's not a whole lot you can do about making it more accurate. But at least when we are using it to revisualize the information on operas, we want to be able to have a better way or a more precise representation on what people are seeing on their account. So this would not have happened if patients were not involved. Second example, so during the pandemic, we have heard from patients that with rheumatoid arthritis, that the challenges they've encountered in managing their health. So after consulting with our patient partners in our project, we actually have made some modification with the OPERA's website. So even we're in the middle of doing a randomized trial, we were able to open up some of the functions for anyone with rheumatoid arthritis who wants to monitor their symptoms and their treatment and their physical activity. And now, it also gives us an opportunity to collect data during the time during COVID, and look at how people are doing in terms of managing their arthritis. So the goal in for this activity is really to provide a way, a tool that people find useful during the pandemic, but we also be able to collect some data. And on the right-hand side, you can see the tweet by one of our patient partners, Eileen Davidson, who helps to promote the project. And she's wearing her Fitbit while getting her infusion treatment. And we actually get a few more people to participate in our work after that tweet. went out. So without extensive advertising, we have about 150 people right now using operas to monitor their rheumatoid arthritis, which is exciting and rewarding. Again, it was really inspired by patient partners to do that. The last example, our patient partners who are working with us really help to push us to think more deeply about what it means to engage meaningfully with patients in research. Around 2016, 17, we have a few trainees who are really interested in this area and engage with the patient partners. And what comes out of it was that with Dr. Jenny Lee's work, interviewing patients with arthritis and their experiences in being patient partners in research, Dr. Cleon Hamilton used that information as a foundation to develop the patient engagement and research framework. He subsequently developed a workbook that helps research teams to engage into conversations with patient partners and the research team when you're starting a project with patients as a part of the team. And earlier this year, Dr. Hamilton has published a scale that measures meaningful patient engagement. It was validated a tool that it's now available for everyone to use. So again, this work was not planned, and actually all three examples that I mentioned were not funded by external additional funding. We use our existing resources, a lot of dedications from researchers and trainees, and great involvement of our patient partners, and be able to produce this work. So for me, the value of working with patient partners to enrich our projects and research and our learning is just immeasurable. And I think what most meaningful, most important for me was that just like in the late 90s, early 2000, that I had the advantage of being mentored by amazing patient partners, pioneers in patient engagement in research. My trainees have the benefit to be mentored by some really amazing patient partners. Some of those you see in this slide right here. So again, it kind of comes in a full circle, and I think the story continues. But I really grateful for all the patient partners we've worked with. And so just to sum up, this talk, I know it may be a little bit all over the place, but it's a bit of a reflection of some of the work that we've done in implementation and patient engagement. I think that coming back to the use of digital technology, it helps to change how we deliver effective rehabilitation interventions and support people with arthritis to stay active. Now, I think having patients involved in research can help to provide important insight into the context that helps to refine how we use technology to promote physical activity. And I would suggest that with the changing landscape in rehabilitation, it is really the right time to invest more in studying what we do, studying how we do the thing, because I think it makes sense that evidence-based rehabilitation needs evidence-based implementation in order for us to serve our patients better. And finally, I want to acknowledge all the important people who have participated, inspired the work, and all the countless hours that they put in, as well as all the wonderful people I work with. So that's my talk, and hopefully we have a bit of time to answer questions and hear your thoughts.